going on, everybody? Culturedog back here with another 80s Mania list. And I do realize the potential for these lists, and a lot of other people have, in their requests, kind of brought to light, I'm focusing mostly on movies in these, and, there's so much more we can do with this, 80s top 10 overarching umbrella. We can go, top 10 soda cans of the 80s, or anything. There's just so much going on outside of film, and even within film we can break it down to best car chases, etc., best exploding heads of the 80s, or best Arnold Schwarzenegger kills of the 80s. There's the potential is limitless, but I have been sticking with films and just specific film genres so far. So let's take a little bit of a break, a breather, and still do something similar, not too far from left field, but we're going to take a break from the cinema screens and go back to the television screens and do TV shows. And so not just like episodes or anything or scenes from TV, but my favorite top 10 TV shows of the 80s. We cannot go out to the cinema every single night of the week. So let's just pretend that, the movie times didn't quite match up what we needed, or we ran out of gas, or we went to the video store and they were out of that new copy of the Terminator or whatever. So, and HBO's not doing a free trial weekend, so we're just going to watch things that are on network and cable television and find out what our favorite shows are. Number 10 is The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers. Is an animated series that kind of filled a void for me. It was a post-Robotech world. So I had already fallen in love with Macross, and I'd fallen in love with anime in general. And so I was watching a lot of cool stuff that I was importing from Japan at the time, but there really wasn't much going on American television that I was connecting with. And I've caught flack for it many times before, but I really didn't fall in love with Transformers and G.I. Joe and Thundercats and all that stuff. And strangely, out of all those, the one I enjoyed the most was Mask, which nobody cares about. Nobody likes Mask, but Scott and T-Bob forever, y'all. So yeah, there wasn't that much that I was falling in love with at the time. Then the Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers came out, which had a lot of science fiction juju at its heart. And it's very Guardians of the Galaxy-esque, but mixed. It's also like a sci-fi western, so it's like pre-Serenity, pre-Cowboy Bebop in a way. These guys that are rangers, but in outer space. And it's got, of course, it's got a robot, and it's got a very Clint Eastwood-esque character. Like, what if Clint Eastwood played Wolverine, but without the claws, but with, guns in outer space, named Goose. And had all these character cliches and everything like that, but it was a very fun space western romp. And sometimes I had some overarching story elements. I was more involved with like space dramas at the times, things like Macross, obviously. So this didn't quite fully scratch that itch, but it definitely like reminded me of some of the, maybe some of the novels I was reading at the time, like Keith Laumer's Retief series. And some of the maybe a little bit of Stainless Steel Rat, something like that. But there was a lot of the vibe of the science fiction I was reading at the time in this show. The show that really was way better than it should have been. So yeah, number 10. I wanted to include in the list just because it was like this oasis for me in television at the time when I was really looking for something to kind of latch onto, and it definitely helped carry me through until the next amazing show came out. Number 9. Peewees Playhouse. I was a huge fan of the Peewees Playhouse show, the hour-long or hour-and-a-half long HBO special, which was just, Pee-wee's live show, basically. But this brought that back, but not for adults, which was interesting because, the original Pee-wee's Playhouse was a kind of twisting of an old kids TV show, but it was played for adults. And of course, there's always that interesting dynamic at play with Paul Rubin's character, who's this childlike adult. You're not quite sure what's going on with Pee-wee, but of course I was a huge fan of Pee-wee's Big Adventure. But yeah, Pee-wee's Playhouse was fun because it was like, all right, well, what if we actually do this for kids, but there's still enough to kind of keep the older audience. And I wasn't like an adult at the time when I watched it by any means, but I was definitely straddling that line where I was looking for maybe some of the edgier humor going on under the current there. But yeah, just Pee-wee hanging out in this playhouse with Cherry and Conky and Globey and the band. The band was the coolest, man. Cool Cat, and, Ms. Wyvon and Captain Carl and John Paragon, man. John B was the man. Mechalika High, Mecca Ho, and just the amount of people that were involved in it, from Lawrence Fishburne and Essa Pather Merkerson and Rob Zombie working on the production staff, the crew. Peewees Playhouse. Number 9. Number 8, The Dukes of Hazzard. Yes, straddling the 70s and the 80s, my early years as a television watcher on Friday nights was dominated by The Incredible Hulk and The Dukes of Hazzard. And I would also have sleepovers at my friend's house, and we'd watch The Dukes of Hazzard together. If I was staying with my dad on like a weekend visit, we were watching The Dukes of Hazzard. If I was staying at home with my mom, we were watching The Dukes of Hazzard. It was just a staple. And being in New England, like, a lot of this stuff was mythology for me, like fast cars doing moonshine runs and kind of country lanes and all this stuff. It was all just it was all fantasy essentially, and loved 70s car chase movies and things like Smokey and the Bandit and all that. So this was a natural transition. And when we were a Mopar family, it was always Dodges and Plymouths growing up, usually Furies and Darts and Satellites, etc. So we never did have a Charger, but the impact of the show was, I can't even state how huge it was. I would try to slide across the hood of my mom's car. I would always try and leave the window down in the summer so I could hop through the window and constantly just get yelled at about it. There was one time when a friend of mine that used to get babysat by the same woman, I think his aunt used to babysit for him, and she would babysit for me, and we would get into trouble all the time. But there was one period there, everyone was having a party, and we snuck out and grabbed my mom's keys so that we could get in to the Mopar ride out in the driveway and pretend like we were Duke boys. We didn't start the car and drive anywhere. We just bounced around in the seats and made sick jumps, etc. So Dukes Hazzard. Number 8. Number 7 is The Twilight Zone. This was one of very many awesome anthology television series at the time, and had stiff competition from Tales from the Dark Side and Amazing Stories, etc. But The Twilight Zone was cool. I mean, I was a fan of the original Twilight Zone. I had grown up to appreciate that and The Outer Limits and classic anthology science fiction horror television. So when they rebooted it, there was a lot of cynicism surrounding it, but I was hooked immediately. And it's so 80s for me because the premiere was the same time Hurricane Gloria tore through my state and damaged so much of it. My entire town was without power essentially, and in typical ridiculous fashion, safety be damned, we decided to drive to another town where a friend of my dad's had power, and this was a chance to watch the world premiere of Twilight Zone, the remake or the reboot. We drove around down to tree branches, etc., just to get at this dude's house to watch Twilight Zone. So stupid, so awesome. And that first episode was, again, another nuclear threat kind of situation going on, and powers to stop time. The writing staff on that show was crazy. And there was, the episode with Rockne O'Bannon going total postmodern when he had writer's block and wrote a freaking episode about himself having writer's block. Pushed the boundaries. I was just talking last night about the episode where a bunch of characters wake up and they actually slipped in the in-between times, and you realize that every single moment of time is built custom from the ground up by these strange kind of blue workmen, and how this one person wakes up in the in-between, and man, it's so amazing. There's so many classic episodes, and just as many as the old black and white Rod Serling originals, and there have been some other attempts at rebooting the series, but the 80s one in particular was the one that is the contender for the throne. Obviously nothing's going to top the original Twilight Zone, but the 80s Twilight Zone was badass. Number 6, technically not a show, so I shouldn't be including it, but as a pop culture explosive device, there is no denying the power of Night Flight. USA Network had freaking Night Flight. And one, it was also a chance for some people that didn't have MTV to get exposure to music videos. That and even if you had MTV like myself, it was your chance to get exposure to music videos that MTV was afraid to play, or later, they were cool enough to play, but it was your exposure to, Art of Noise videos and all sorts of cool stuff. Fire Sign Theater films, like Nick Danger films, like Spike and Mike's Sick and Twisted Animation Festival, like stuff like that you can catch on TV. Short films. There's a short film that I've never seen anywhere else and never heard referenced anywhere else. That's like part of my pop cultural DNA, called The Lemon Man. And I don't want to take up too much time talking about it. Maybe another video, but it's amazing. Jack Mack and Rad Boy, I still quote to this day. You can see a split second of it on a screen in Marty McFly's future house in Back to the Future Part 2. So many things that Night Flight brought to us. J-Man Forever, so much comedy, so much just alt culture, and music videos. Years before they did like those video director celebration series for like Chris Cunningham and Spike Jonze or whatever that I think Palm put out on DVD. Years before that, they would do stuff like that on Night Flight, and Zbigniew Rybczynski got celebrated in a killer thing, which I actually have that episode, and I copied it. But he did like videos for bands like Accept and Propaganda, and it was a place where that stuff was the norm. And man, Night Flight was the coolest, and it's pretty well documented now. There's a Facebook page for it. I think pretty much everything's been archived. So I mean, there's no need for me to archive my old VHS tapes, but I'm going to anyways, just because I have the original airings with the commercials, my local commercials and stuff. So Night Flight. I should get a Night Flight tattoo. It was that important. Number 5. Speaking of taking the past, rejuvenating it, and possibly treading on sacred territory, Star Trek The Next Generation. And I haven't actually watched the show in quite some time, which is a shame because there's some new releases of it that I really need to pick up. But it was something, as a science fiction fan at the time, that followed Starlog and Cinefantastique and all these magazines religiously, and was just tapped into conventions and things like that. We were all keenly aware that Star Trek was coming back to television, and it wasn't as important because the Star Trek films had become such a huge cultural moment in the 80s, between Wrath of Khan and The Voyage Home specifically, that we weren't starved for Star Trek content, but just the idea that there was a new Star Trek show coming out with new characters was pretty fascinating. And it definitely had a rocky start, but I mean, the encounter at Farpoint was, holy crap, like I remember everything about seeing it the first time, and it was syndicated too, so you could see it on multiple shows. I remember my mom going out bowling and me like, I gotta go home and watch Encounter at Farpoint. This is like the most important thing going on. And then I remember seeing it again when I was like over my cousin's house that weekend. I'm like, oh, we should watch this show. This looks interesting. Having already seen it like 2 or 3 times at that point. So the fact that it wasn't amazing yet, it didn't really matter because we were also invested in it. So by the time it did get amazing in like season 3 or so, it was worth the wait. So many great episodes of that series, like Yesterday's Enterprise in particular, Best of Both Worlds, parts 1 and 2. Episodes that were better than any of the Next Gen movies. None of the Next Gen movies were able to best the top episodes of the series. Again, like it had some very video effects work going on in it, so it was definitely a product of its time. But Next Gen, it was too cool, and it was good sci-fi. It was good, very cerebral sci-fi, and it was cool having a captain like Jean-Luc Picard. It was very non-80s, action, punching, throwing saw blades at people's heads. It was very kind of cerebral sci-fi, which was fun. They helped to keep it low budget, of course, too. But and it had surround sound and stuff too. So, oh man, awesome. Number 4, a show that we saw here in the States later. But much like, I gave Night Flight a lot of credit for pop culture and exposing audiences to cool things. MTV still deserves a lot of credit, and one of the best things they ever did was they brought the British show, The Young Ones, to American shores and exposed a bunch of us to the exploits of college students, Mike and Vivian and Rick and Neil. And it's just a hilarious show, really dealing with Thatcher, England, really 80s, and then also injecting bands into every episode too. That was like my first exposure to Motorhead, seeing them play Ace of Spades. But yeah, like Rip Rig and Panic and Jules Holland and all these people, they would always take a break in the middle of whatever nonsense was going on in the show to turn it into a variety show and just introduce a band that would be playing in whatever space they were in, like their grungy living room or just out in the street somewhere where some nonsense was happening. Great stuff, great British sense of humor. And yeah, it was cool because it was this exploration of all these different character dynamics, you know, a yuppie, you know, a edgy activist, a hippie, and just this total punk. And everyone loved Vivian. I tried to dress up like Vivian for Halloween one year. I couldn't quite get the studs to stick to my head, but I got the orange hair thing, and I did the mohawk. I did my very best. I think I defaced like an old rock t-shirt or something like that, and did my best Vivian with what I had at my beck and call. Yeah, I thought Vivian was the coolest. I wanted to get a hamster or gerbil and name them Special Patrol Groups, and I never did. But yeah, and the quotes go on for days. So The Young Ones. There is a very cool DVD compilation of those that I have as well. And they would splice in, I think in season 2, they would splice in just random images like once or twice in an episode. So it had subliminal imagery in it too, which is the weirdest thing ever. So cool. The Young Ones. It affected everybody, and bands like the Beastie Boys, etc. Like it kind of tweaked our sense of humor over here in the States as young kids. Who's Bill? Number 3 is a show that was insanely ahead of its time, but I was sold from the minute go because I was already a fan of the character. The character was introduced as a talk show host and just general personality about town, albeit computer generated, albeit not computer generated fully because of the limitations of the time. An amazing actor named Matt Frewer had to bring the character to life through prosthetics and just amazing facial manipulation, etc. And you know by now I'm talking about Max Headroom. There was a show / movie called 20 Minutes in the Future, and it was hard to get at first. You could get it on tape over here in the States, and someone somewhere along the line decided that was a smart idea to turn into a network television show, and turn into a network television show that was critical of network television stations and just and news organizations, and really, really good stuff. Nobody could have expected that character as like this fun 80s like soda huckster to turn into this amazing television show that was cyberpunk before cyberpunk was really exploited cinematically or on television screens. But yeah, it was a journalist who worked for a network that was involved in these things called blipverts. So they're amazingly, like, it's so prescient, like getting into commercials, getting shorter and shorter, like basically trying to get your information to consumers as quickly as possible, and it's actually at some point becoming harmful to them. And this one guy digging into that and then becoming in danger because of it, and out of that is born this side character, this unleashed ego essentially of this main character, which is Max Headroom. So it's really fascinating as he's this guy, like one of the last legitimate journalists in this futuristic society, trying to go about doing his business, but he's got this, you know, unfettered splinter of himself, which can be an angel or a devil on his shoulder at different times. And, you know, depending on the show, and just so much of like the science fiction concepts of the show were ahead of their time. Just the show in general, everything about it was amazing. And thankfully there was a nice DVD set out there that Shout Factory put out. You got to get it. Max Headroom is too cool, and it's I'm so glad I have it all, because It did eventually get re-aired on Bravo and Sci-Fi, and some of the episodes that did make it onto ABC originally were available. But I mean, I was taping these off the original air dates, and I remember being concerned about my vacation to Florida in May of 1987 because I was going to be missing, and I think it was like the rake ball episode was like a roller ball, like a cyberpunk rollerball spin going on with like skateboards or something. That episode, I think, was airing while I was away in Florida, and I was really obsessed with making sure the timer on my VCR was set perfectly. I mean, just 80s problems, man. I had to have it set perfectly to get that episode of Max Headroom because I did not want to miss it. And it was so important to me and as a part of the culture at the time. So, number 3, Max Headroom. Number 2, Robotech. And I know purists like to hate on it now, because it's very easy to hate on Harmony Gold and Carl Macek and everyone involved in bringing Macross from Japan to the United States because of the way they did it and how it's since impacted the rights to other Macross products. And that's a whole video in and of itself. But on the other hand, it brought Macross to the United States. And I was aware of Macross because I had seen some of those, gorgeous illustrations in magazines, and the promotion of the original cassettes. They were originally going to try and bring it over into VHS, like direct sales. I think you could get like the first 2 or 3 episodes if you wrote in and sent like a check for $50-$60 or something like that. It was this gorgeous painting of the SDF-1 or the Super Dimension Fortress Macross on the page of like Starlog magazine or something, and I was like, whoa, this looks cool. And then interestingly, a lot of the models that I was really getting into model building at the time, a lot of the great like Veritech, Valkyrie models were being rebranded here in the States and sold under this Robotech banner. And it didn't really mean much. It was just robots and transformable robots, but it was just a means to an end of getting these Japanese model kits here in the States. So sometimes they were Orgus ships, sometimes they were Valkyrie, sometimes they were just their own creations, and I forgot, it was like Revell or something that put out that imprint. But I knew, Robotech equals Macross models, and there were so many Robotech models available here. So one day I was just looking in the TV guide, and at like freaking 4 or 5 in the morning one day, I saw Robotech listed. And at the time, there was something going on with our VCR, or for some reason I was unable to set up the recording for myself. I'm not sure why. I don't think we were in between VCRs, because I was certainly able to watch it, but for some reason I was unable to record it. So I contacted my friend, and his dad, bless his heart, Carl Bentley, shout out, was cool enough they were able to facilitate my viewing of this show and set up to record it for like a week at a time. Yeah, maybe I was in between VCRs. I think our VCR was busted because I actually had to go over to his house and watch like the first like 4 or 5 episodes at his house. So I gave him a tape, and I have instructions to watch it, and I didn't even know, but I didn't even know what it was because there was no advertising for Robotech when I came on over here. It just showed up in the middle of the night, middle of the morning. But I knew in my gut that it had to be Macross, because Robotech model kits were largely Macross model kits. So this show Robotech has got to be, there's like at least a 75 to 80% chance that it's Macross, the show. And it was. And then some. Obviously, if you know anything about Robotech, it is 3 separate shows that were then brought together in order to reach syndication standards, because you couldn't just have like 25, 26, 7 episodes. You had to have a huge chunk to get your animated shows syndicated. So they also brought in Mospeda and Southern Cross, these 2 other shows, and then forced them into a cohesive storyline in 3 like separate generations in this Robotech world. But the one that was altered the least essentially was Macross, because that was the one that the other films had to be kind of retrofitted to match. There was like 1 episode where they injected the Robotech masters from Southern Cross into like an episode or 2 of Macross, but other than that, they didn't really mess with it that much. It was essentially the same characters, the same story, etc. So it was a legitimate way to fall in love with Macross. Of course, they changed the music altogether. But as much as I hate to say it, I also fell in love with the Robotech music at the time, and I bought the LP, and I have that, and so haters gonna hate, but Robotech was an insane gateway drug and allowed me to. I even wrote like a high school like thesis on Macross and Robotech and its implications and its impact on the popular culture. And yeah, man. So when everybody else was binging on insert 80s popular animated show, there I was all the way in on the Robotech. And once I could find something like that level of a space opera, I wasn't settling for a second best. So I was a bit of a snooty cartoon connoisseur at the time. But yeah, Robotech shook my world to its foundations. And number 1, Miami freaking Vice. It is everything 80s. It's Michael Mann to its core, even though Anthony Yerkovich created it. But it's so much more than the MTV Cops, supposed origin of the story. Crockett and Tubbs are the coolest guys ever. Don Johnson and Philip Michael Thomas. These two guys in Miami dealing with all sorts of nasty 80s drug criminals and Castillo. Edward James Olmos was just this simmering entity of just bottled anger and he was so intense at every moment. Like if you were asking to go on a cigarette break, he'd be like, do it. Hey boss, do you want to go to the movies on Friday night? What are we going to see? I don't know, maybe like Enemy Mine or something. Okay, do it. Yeah, like everything was life or death, and there was that just heightened elevated mood about the show. The music of the show was insane, untouchable. So many great songs, and the amount of killer supporting actors that showed up over the years. The guest star list is insane as you start watching it. The Jan Hammer score is sublime. It's amazing. There should be more of it available in CD form. There was a great double disc that's expensive as all hell. I mean, you can listen to it all on YouTube now. But yeah, the soundtrack albums were sadly a mix of songs from the shows. I mean, which isn't bad because there's some great stuff on there. But the Jan Hammer stuff there should be a real nice complete score, relatively complete score available. But yeah, everything about Miami Vice was I was all up in it. And again, that was just one of those things I had to be home to watch it. And it was event television for sure. And I rewatch it on a regular basis, and it doesn't get old, and it still has that same spirit, that 80s mood to it. And yeah, I mean, the Noog Man's pretty annoying now. Izzy sometimes pretty annoying, but I love everything about Miami Vice, and it's just going to be a perennial. I'm just going to keep watching it. I've got the DVDs, I've got the Blu-rays, and I'm just going to keep on watching it until the end of time, essentially. So Miami Vice is just a bottle of 80s, but it's expanded out of its container, and it's loose. There's no stopping it now. So number 1, Miami Vice. Thanks for hanging out with some more top 10 lists. We're gonna go back into the lab and create a few more for you. We're getting closer to sci-fi, though. I swear, it's right around the corner. Yeah, and horror too. Don't worry, they're coming. Cheers.